Let's go over how to develop fitness programs for yourself and others. So the first thing you want to do is look at the health history questionnaire and review those safety considerations, those red flags. Do you have high blood pressure, arrhythmias, joint problems, metabolic issues? If so, make sure that you've seen a doctor and follow their recommendations. These can also help you develop your goals. So if you have high blood pressure, you might set up a cardiovascular program or cardiorespiratory program to help you lose weight. And there's been a lot of research that's shown that as you lose weight, your blood pressure comes down too. And the cardio will help strengthen your heart and it'll help you out in the long term. Now, if you have any joint problems, you can also set up your goals where you want to avoid strength training. And what I mean by that is lifting really heavy weight. It's not that you can't do any strength training, but it's how you do it that would be important. So instead of doing muscle strength, maybe you focus more on muscle endurance so that you're not lifting really heavy weight and putting a lot of strain on your joints. You also want to look at the normative data for health-related components. So there's a lot of normative data out there, and that kind of gives you a starting point. It allows you to kind of see your strengths and weaknesses. And when you're trying to set up a program for yourself or for others, maybe it's somebody that doesn't have any idea where to start at, that normative data is really helpful. So, for example, maybe you did push-ups and you were below average. Well, that's a starting point, right? So now you can say, I want to improve my muscle endurance and at least get to average by the time I do my post-test. And so that allows you to kind of set up your goals. All of those health-related components, like I said before, have a lot of normative data. So maybe you want to improve your body composition, and so you can say, okay, I'm just slightly outside the healthy range for percent body fat, and I want to, if I lose 2%, I'll get within that healthy range. So that's a realistic goal that you could do in 16 weeks easily, as long as you stayed focused and followed your goals. But maybe your goals don't have anything to do with the health-related components. You can set up your goals based on sport specificity. Maybe you play a certain sport and you design all your training to improve your sport performance. That's another area that you could focus on. Weight management, improving mobility, all of those are good areas to set up your goals. Make sure that those goals are SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. We talked about that before. This is a good way to set up your short-term goals that will eventually lead to one long-term goal. So you can have 2 or 3 short-term goals, but they should all be pointed to the same long-term goal. Motivation is a key issue. I often see beginners jump right in and do too much too soon. So to prevent that, setting your training zones really helps. An example of that is if you're going to do cardiorespiratory training, you find out what your estimated max heart rate is and you train at a percentage of it. You set an upper limit and a lower limit and you train in between those two. That allows you not to train too hard and not to go too easy. That maximizes your benefit. You can do that same principle on resistance training. You can take your 1 rep max that you got from bench press and set up your whole training program based on that 1 rep max and train at a percentage. Maybe you train at 80% of your 1 rep max, and that allows you to determine the number of repetitions that you do with each set. Barriers to success: self-fulfilling prophecy and locus of control. You've probably all seen it. Some people have self-fulfilling prophecies that lead them to not do or reach their full potential, or sometimes it leads them to fail. The belief you have in yourself will cause you to take certain actions. So if they're positive and you believe you're going to succeed, a lot of times you'll take actions that lead to that success. So you're more likely to go and work out because you believe in yourself. But if you believe you're going to fail, oftentimes you'll have actions that lead you not to go out and work out because you already feel like it's not worth the effort. You already feel like you're going to fail. Why waste the time? And that also, other people pick up on that. And so if you're negative, they're going to have an impact on your own belief because of how they treat you. Same thing as if you're positive. If you're always positive, they're going to have a reaction to that and cause you to be more likely to succeed. So having a good internal locus of control is a good way to take others out of the decision-making process. So as long as you believe in yourself and you believe that you're in control, you can have a big impact on reaching your goals. But if you believe others are in control of your destiny, you're more likely to fail. So let's talk a little bit about reinforcement versus punishment. It's all about behavior. If you're trying to increase behavior, that's reinforcement. If you're trying to decrease behavior, that's punishment. So it's best to really focus on reinforcement. You're more likely to succeed. People don't often maintain their motivation when they have to deal with punishment. So an example of positive reinforcement would be adding something somebody wants to increase their behavior. An example of negative reinforcement would be removing something they don't want to increase behavior. An example of positive punishment would be adding something they don't like to decrease behavior. And then an example of negative punishment would be removing something pleasant that they like to decrease their behavior. So that chart kind of sums it all up. It's best to focus on reinforcement than punishment. That's the only reason I have these two in here. Now sometimes people just gravitate towards punishment because they're trying to decrease a certain behavior. That's okay. Sometimes you have to. But it's best to focus on reinforcement. So FIT principle, that's going to help you kind of set up your whole program, and that stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. Frequency is how often you work out. Intensity is how hard you go. Time is how long you go for, and type is it aerobic, is it anaerobic? But it all depends on your goals, on how you're going to set up the FIT principle. And so that's how you record your information and keep track of it. So creating a fitness program yourself, again, create some SMART goals that lead to one larger, I know it says larger goals, but really one large goal. Use that pretest information. So use that as a starting point to tell you where you're at. Are you above or below in some areas? Use that normative data to decide where you're at, where your weaknesses are. And then if they're sport specific or general fitness, kind of decide what's the general theme of your goal. Am I going to focus on health-related components? Am I going to just focus on general fitness? Am I trying to improve sport performance? Really defining that will help you design a really good, solid program. So you also want to follow the American College of Sports Medicine recommendations. And this is really helpful for people that have no idea where to start. It's really good for beginners. And it's also good for people that are into personal training because it kind of tells you where your new clients should start at. So for cardiorespiratory exercise, ACSM recommends 150 minutes of at least moderate intensity exercise per week. So we're looking at 5 days per week at least 30 to 60 minutes would get you there. That's for moderate intensity. For vigorous intensity, we're looking at 3 days per week at 20 to 60 minutes. You don't have to go as much because it's a lot more intense. You want to make sure that, now, if you're looking at how often you work out, so cardiorespiratory endurance activities are continuous and repetitive, but they can be cumulative, meaning I could do 10 minutes of exercise. Let's say I go out and run for 10 minutes in the morning, run 10 minutes in the afternoon, and run 10 minutes right before I go to bed. That 30 minutes has the same health benefits as running a straight 30 minutes. Now, it doesn't have the same impact on sport performance, but it does on health benefits. So that's something to consider. If you're just trying to improve your overall health, you can really spread out your workouts throughout the day, and it makes it a lot easier to manage. Alright, so for resistance exercise, you want to hit the major muscle groups 2 or 3 days each week. So we're talking about, well, we'll go over those in the muscles chapter, but pectoralis major, deltoid, triceps, biceps, rectus abdominis, quadriceps, hamstrings, glutes, gastrocnemius. All of those are huge major muscle groups. So we're talking about hitting those at least 2 to 3 days each week. So for an older person, doesn't need to be too intense, right? They just need a little bit of resistance training, more muscle endurance than anything else. Same thing for people that were sedentary, that hadn't worked out before. They don't want to jump right in and do too much heavy lifting because they're more likely to get injured. 2 to 4 sets is optimum for progression. And for strength training, about 8 to 12 reps is ideal. And then for middle-aged people or older people, just like I said before, muscle endurance is a little bit better. So we're looking at 10 to 15 reps. Muscle endurance, 15 to 20 reps. And for the major muscle groups, especially if you really broke them down, you want to give them at least 48 hours of rest for adequate recovery. All right, for flexibility activities, 2 to 3 days a week to help improve range of motion. Hold those exercises for 10 to 30 seconds, and you want to repeat each stretch 2 to 4 times to get the most benefit out of it. You can do static, which is just holding a stretch at the end of the range of motion. You can do dynamic, which is like moving through a range of motion. So if you were kicking a heavy bag, that's an example of a dynamic stretch. Ballistic is bouncing in a stretch. You got to be real careful with that one, because if the muscles aren't warmed up, you can activate the muscle spindles and tear a muscle. Or PNF stretching, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It's a big word. All you're doing, you're activating a different type of muscle, a proprioceptor, and what happens is it tells the muscle to relax. We'll get into that in future chapters. But it's most effective, stretching is most effective when the muscle's warmed up. And they've done a lot of research on this, and really you should do your stretching at the end of a workout. I know a lot of people debate this, but there's been a lot of research in that area. So neuromuscular exercise or functional fitness training, 2 to 3 days per week. So we're talking about balance, agility, coordination, gait, all of those. So it's helping you kind of move throughout the space. Great for sport performance as well. Functional fitness is great for sport performance because you can go through all the movements you would do in that sport and you use them as an exercise. So 20 to 30 minutes per day, and that helps get those skills ingrained into muscle memory. So it's really good for sport performance. Aerobic versus anaerobic. Aerobic is continuous and repetitive. All right? So I'm not talking about in the presence of oxygen or anything like that. It's continuous and repetitive. Anaerobic is stop and go. It's pretty easy to remember that. And you can combine traditional anaerobic activities and make them aerobic. I always do this. I try to blend mine together. So like I'll run for a short distance, drop down, do push-ups, run for a short distance, stop and do some lunges, run for another short distance, stop and do some sit-ups, and I just blend them together. So you're knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone. Periodization. So examples of that would be focusing on strength training for, let's say, 12 weeks, right? You're still doing cardio maybe once or twice during the week in your endurance activities, but your main focus for that 12 weeks is strength training. And then the next 12 weeks, you're focused on muscle endurance. And you may still do some strength training. You may still do some cardio in there, but the main focus is muscle endurance. And then you can do the same thing for cardio. Most elite level athletes do this type of training because it allows them not to over-specialize in any one area. So you see that a lot in the NFL where they're getting ready during off-season and they build up. And then by the time they get to off-season, they're still doing these other activities, but they're doing mainly functional fitness activities in training camp, going through plays, running routes, and all that good stuff. So overload, increasing the intensity over time. So that can be done in resistance training, that can be done in cardio training. So an example of that is increasing heart rate during interval training. That's an example of overload. So resistance training, you're increasing the amount of weight slowly but surely, or you're increasing the number of reps, decreasing rest interval. All those are examples of overload for resistance training. Training zones, this is how to set up your training zone. So this is for a 20-year-old person. You're taking 220 minus your age, so their estimated max, remember that's estimated, max heart rate is 200. That may not be their true heart rate, especially if they've been doing cardio all their life. So then you take the estimated max, multiply it by your upper limit, which is 80%, and that gives you a heart rate of 160. So I wouldn't want to go above that if I was a beginner. So now we're going to set the lower limit at 70%. So we take that 200 again, which is the estimated max heart rate, multiply it by 70%, and that gives us 140. So if I was looking at my heart rate monitor and I was running, I looked down, I saw 155. Good. I know I'm in between my upper and lower limit. I'm not training too hard. If I looked down and saw 175, I'm like, oh crap, I'm training way too hard. I'm not going to last very long. Or if I looked down and saw 120, I'm like, man, I'm not even training hard enough to get a lot of benefit out of this for my sport, right? So that's how you use training zones. You could do the same thing for resistance activity. Now there is a big formula on how to set up based on your 1 rep max, but this is easier right here. This is a lot easier to do. You take, let's say my 1 rep max was 200 on bench press, and I want to train at 80% of my 1 rep max. That means I need to work out with 160. I should be able to do about 8 to 10 reps with 160 if that's 80% of my 1 rep max. Or maybe I want to set it at 50%. So then I would just train at 100. Train with 100 pounds, and I should be able to rep that out. I'd probably be better off just doing push-ups because I'd be doing more weight with push-ups. So now we're going to develop that workout program, and eventually that will lead to an improvement plan eventually. But right now we're setting up how we're going to improve, and at the end of the semester we'll see if we actually improve based on our workout program. So I hope this was helpful. This is a really long video, mainly because it had so many slides and so much information.